Daniel Harper had just moved into his new apartment in Portland, Oregon, after his quiet divorce. He was 41.com by nature, but lately his life felt like a long echo of silence. The new place was small, old-fashioned, with thin walls and wooden floors that creaked with every step. Still, it was his chance to start over a new chapter without the heavy noise of the past. He liked that idea. His next-door neighbor was a woman named Emily Carter. The first time Daniel saw her, she was standing on the porch watering a row of small potted plants. Her hair was light brown, tied in a loose bun, and her face carried both warmth and a hint of sadness. She smiled politely when he greeted her, the kind of smile that felt genuine but distant, as if she'd learned to protect her heart. Daniel had no reason to think much about her then. She was just his neighbor, kind, quiet, and seemingly at peace. The days passed in quiet rhythm. Daniel worked from home as a freelance designer, spent evenings reading, and tried to adjust to living alone. Sometimes he heard faint sounds from next door, a TV show, the soft closing of a door, or music playing faintly. He never minded. It made the place feel less lonely. One evening, everything changed. It was late, maybe around 11. Daniel had just finished brushing his teeth when he heard something unusual through the bathroom wall. At first he thought it was the pipes. Old buildings often groaned and sighed. But then he heard it again, soft, broken sounds. A woman crying. He froze, toothbrush still in hand. It was quiet but unmistakable, muffled sobs, short breaths, like someone trying to hide their tears. He turned off the water and listened, his heart tightening. The sound was coming from the other side of the wall, from Emily's bathroom. Daniel didn't know what to do. He couldn't just knock on her door in the middle of the night. They barely knew each other. Maybe she needed privacy. Maybe it wasn't even his business. But he couldn't shake the feeling that she was truly hurting. He sat on the edge of the tub, listening for a few more seconds, torn between respect and concern. Then, after a while, the sound faded. The silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy, full of questions. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about that sound, those quiet tears that had passed through the wall and somehow reached his heart. Who was she crying for? What kind of pain makes someone break like that when they think no one's listening? The next morning, he decided not to overthink it. Maybe it was just one bad night. People have those. Still, when he stepped out to get his mail, he saw her in the hallway. Emily was wearing a simple gray sweater and holding a cup of coffee. Her eyes were slightly red, though she'd tried to cover it with a faint smile. "Morning," Daniel said softly, unsure if he should mention anything. "Morning," she replied, her voice calm but distant. He wanted to ask if she was okay, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he gave a polite nod and walked to his mailbox. But as he turned, she spoke quietly, almost to herself. "Rough night," she said, letting out a shaky laugh. Daniel paused. "Yeah," he said carefully. "These walls are thin, huh?" Her eyes flickered toward him. For a second, she looked surprised, then a bit embarrassed, but she didn't seem angry. She gave a faint smile. "You heard?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Just a little. I'm sorry if that's too personal." "No, it's fine," she said quickly. "I just had a moment, I guess." He didn't press. Instead, he smiled softly. "We all have those." She looked at him again, studying his face as if deciding whether to trust him. "Thanks," she finally said, her voice quiet but sincere. Then she turned and walked back to her apartment for the rest of the day. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about that brief conversation. There had been something real in her eyes, not just sadness, but a kind of exhaustion that comes from trying to stay strong for too long. He'd seen that look in the mirror before. That evening, as the sun set and golden light spilled through the blinds, Daniel sat by his kitchen window, sipping coffee. He could hear faint music from Emily's apartment, a soft piano tune. It was gentle, melancholic, but comforting. Somehow, knowing she was awake and finding a bit of peace made him feel better too. Over the next few days, their paths crossed more often. Small moments, a shared elevator ride, a wave in the parking lot, a polite good morning, nothing more. But there was a quiet understanding forming between them. the kind that doesn't need many words. Then, one night, Daniel heard something again. But this time, it wasn't crying. It was humming. A soft tune coming from her bathroom, a song he couldn't recognize, but one that carried emotion, like a memory turned into sound. He smiled faintly, realizing she must have been bathing, trying to relax. The thought wasn't intimate, just human. The kind of simple comfort that comes from knowing someone nearby is healing, little by little. He leaned back against the wall, listening for a moment. The sound was calming, rhythmic. He didn't know why, but it made him feel less alone. Maybe they were both rebuilding in their own quiet ways, separated by nothing more than a few inches of plaster and tile. Days later, he saw her again on the porch. She was tending to her plants, humming that same melody. Daniel smiled. "That song," he said, "it's nice." "What is it?" She looked up, surprised. "Oh, it's something my husband used to play on the piano." Her voice softened, her eyes distant. Daniel's expression grew gentle. He must have had good taste. She smiled faintly, setting down the watering can. He did. They stood there for a moment, both quiet, both caught in the weight of their own thoughts. The air between them felt soft, not awkward, just honest. That night, Daniel sat at his desk, working on a design project, but his mind kept drifting to Emily, her quiet strength, the sadness in her eyes, and that song. He realized that sometimes the people who seem calmest are the ones carrying the deepest storms inside. He didn't know her story fully yet, but he felt drawn, not out of curiosity, but empathy. There was something about her that reminded him how fragile and strong people could be at the same time. And though he didn't know it, Emily was beginning to notice him too. Not in a romantic way, not yet, but as someone who understood silence, who didn't try to fill it with noise or questions. That thin wall between their bathrooms had unknowingly become something else. A bridge between two hearts quietly trying to heal. And soon, that fragile connection would turn into something far deeper, something neither of them could have predicted. The next morning, Daniel woke up to the sound of soft rain tapping against his window. The world outside looked quiet and gray, but his thoughts were still restless. He couldn't stop thinking about Emily, about that fragile sadness behind her smile. He didn't know why he cared so much about a neighbor he'd only spoken to twice, but something about her felt familiar. It was the loneliness, maybe, the same kind that had been living inside him since his marriage ended. Later that morning, Daniel saw her again in the hallway. She was dressed neatly for work, her hair pulled back, holding a travel mug of coffee. She smiled politely, but her eyes looked tired. He hesitated, then said, "You look like you didn't sleep much." She gave a small laugh. "I didn't. I had too much on my mind." He nodded, not wanting to pry. "Well, if you ever need to talk or need anything, I'm just next door." Emily looked at him for a moment, surprised by his tone. It wasn't pushy or curious, just kind. "That's nice of you," she said softly. "Thank you, Daniel." He smiled. "Anytime." That was all. Just a small exchange in the hallway. But something about it lingered. That evening, Daniel was watching the rain from his living room window when there was a gentle knock at his door. He opened it, and there she was, Emily holding 2 steaming mugs. "Hi," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I thought you might like some tea. I made chamomile." Daniel blinked, a little surprised, but pleasantly so. "That's really thoughtful. Come in." She stepped inside, looking around with a small smile. "Your place is nice," she said. "Simple but cozy." "Thanks," he said, taking the cup she handed him. Still working on making it feel like home. They sat down at his small dining table. The rain outside added a soft rhythm to the room. For a few moments, they just sipped their tea quietly, not needing to rush into conversation. Then Emily spoke. "I hope I didn't make things awkward the other night," she said, eyes focused on her mug. "I didn't mean for you to hear me." Daniel shook his head. "You didn't. Don't worry about it. Everyone breaks down sometimes. It's normal." She gave a weak smile. Still, it's embarrassing. I don't usually cry. I try to stay strong, but some days—" Her voice trailed off. "You don't have to explain," he said gently. "We all have those days." Emily nodded. "It's just, my husband passed away last year. We were married for 15 years, and now I'm trying to figure out how to live alone again." Daniel's heart sank. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't know." "It's okay," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've stopped telling people. It's hard to keep saying it out loud." They've sat in silence for a while, both letting the quiet say what words couldn't. Then Daniel looked at her, and for the first time he saw her not as a neighbor, but as someone brave, someone surviving something deeply painful. He finally said, "I went through a divorce last year. Different kind of loss, but I think I understand the empty feeling that follows." Emily looked up, meeting his eyes. "Yeah," she said softly. "It's strange, isn't it? You spend years building a life with someone, and suddenly you're back to eating dinner alone, talking to the walls." Daniel chuckled lightly. "Well, at least these walls talk back sometimes." She smiled, a real one this time. "You mean me?" He grinned. "Exactly." That broke the heaviness. They started talking, not like to strangers, but like old friends catching up after years apart. Emily told him about her work as a school counselor, about how she loved helping children but couldn't seem to help herself. Daniel shared how he'd switched from a corporate job to freelance design to escape burnout. They talked about favorite movies, rainy weather, and how Portland had the best coffee shops if you knew where to look. Time slipped away. When Emily glanced at her phone, it was almost midnight. "Oh, wow," she said, surprised. "I didn't mean to stay this long." Daniel smiled. "You can stay as long as you want. It's nice having company for a change." She looked at him for a long moment, that kind of look where words aren't needed. "You know," she said softly, "I almost didn't knock, but something told me I should." He tilted his head. "I'm glad you did." She stood, picking up her empty cup. "Thank you, Daniel." "Really? For what?" He asked, for listening. After she left, Daniel stood by the door for a long while, thinking about how warm the room had felt when she was there. It wasn't romantic yet, not in the way people usually think of romance, but there was something gentle between them, something fragile but alive. The next few days felt different. Their friendship began to form naturally. Sometimes she'd knock on his door with cookies or tea. Sometimes he'd help her carry groceries. They never said anything about the connection building between them, but it was their quiet, respectful, real. One evening, Daniel was fixing a leaky tap in his bathroom when he heard laughter from the other side of the wall. Emily's laughter. It was the first time he'd heard that sound from her, and it made him smile without even realizing it. The next morning, they met again by the mailbox. She looked brighter, her eyes livelier. "You seem happier today," Daniel said. "I am," she admitted. "I had a long talk with my sister last night. It helped. I think I'm starting to feel lighter." "That's good," he said warmly. "You deserve to." Then, out of nowhere, she added, "You've helped too, you know? Just by being kind. You make this place feel a little less lonely." Daniel felt something stir inside him, a quiet warmth that he hadn't felt in a long time. "I'm glad," he said simply. She smiled. "Next time, tea's on me. Or maybe coffee. You choose." "Coffee," he said immediately, and they both laughed. That night, Daniel sat in his apartment, listening to the faint sound of Emily's piano music through the wall. It was gentle and full of emotion. He thought about how their connection had started, just a sound through the wall, and how it had turned into something meaningful. He wasn't sure what it was yet, friendship, comfort, or something that might become more, but it felt right. He didn't feel alone anymore, and he sensed that she didn't either. As the night deepened, the rain began again, steady and calm. Daniel sat back, closed his eyes, and listened not just to the music, but to the quiet rhythm of two lives slowly finding their way back to warmth, one shared moment at a time. The days after their tea evening passed quickly. But the bond between Daniel and Emily grew in ways neither of them had expected. They were careful, respectful of boundaries, yet the comfort they found in each other was undeniable. Simple routines became moments of connection, shared smiles in the hallway, brief chats over mail, even small favors like delivering groceries or exchanging recipes. It was subtle, quiet, and yet profoundly comforting. One evening, Daniel was in his bathroom, fixing a shelf that had been leaning awkwardly for weeks. The task wasn't complicated, but it required him to lean against the wall for support. As he adjusted the shelf, he heard a familiar sound through the thin plaster. Emily humming dotted first. He froze. He hadn't expected her to be home, let alone humming. Her voice was soft but clear, carrying the kind of warmth that made him pause. It wasn't just the sound of someone humming. It was the sound of someone alive, someone slowly finding joy again. He smiled to himself and leaned lightly against the wall. "Nice song," he called softly. "Do I get to know the name, or is it a secret?" There was a short pause, then a gentle laugh. "Daniel, is that you again? Testing the wall?" He laughed, realizing how strange it must sound to neighbors, talking through a wall like children whispering secrets. "Maybe. I just wanted to see if the wall could handle your voice," he said. She laughed again. A melodic sound that seemed to fill the small space between their apartments. "Well, I guess it's strong. Or maybe just desperate for company," she teased. That moment, so simple and unremarkable to anyone else, was monumental for them. It was the first time they communicated without face-to-face interaction, without the usual cautious politeness. Through the wall, they were unguarded, free to speak and laugh in a way they hadn't allowed themselves for months. From that night on, talking through the wall became a quiet ritual. Daniel would be in the bathroom fixing something, washing up, or even brushing his teeth, and Emily would hum or speak softly. They talked about favorite movies, childhood memories, and little dreams they'd almost forgotten. Sometimes they would share confessions, small things that seemed too trivial or vulnerable to say out loud to anyone else. One night, Emily spoke in a hushed voice, almost afraid to let the sound escape. "You know, Daniel, sometimes I just sit here, listen to the water running, the hum of my own voice. And it reminds me that someone's close. Someone I don't have to explain myself to." Daniel leaned back against the wall, feeling a warmth spread through him he hadn't anticipated. "I think I do the same," he admitted quietly. "It's comforting. You don't realize how much you miss human presence until you notice it in small things like this." There was a pause, filled with the quiet rhythm of their apartment walls. Then Emily whispered, "I never thought I'd feel this. Connected through a wall." "Neither did I," Daniel replied softly. It wasn't romance yet. It wasn't physical attraction or longing in a traditional sense. It was deeper, a connection rooted in shared experience, in vulnerability, in the understanding that both had been through pain and were still standing. It was quiet, patient, and sincere, the kind of bond that could grow into something enduring. Over the next week, their routine continued. Daniel found himself looking forward to those small interactions. He would finish tasks faster, hoping to hear her humming. Sometimes he'd intentionally create noises, a faucet drip, the shuffle of a towel, just to see if she would respond. Emily, in turn, began leaving little notes under his door or small gifts, a handmade bookmark, a packet of tea, a funny drawing, as if acknowledging that their shared wall was a bridge, not a barrier. One rainy afternoon, Daniel found himself laughing out loud when he heard Emily describe a childhood memory through the wall, how she had once tried to train a squirrel in her backyard, only to have it steal her sandwich. He responded with his own childhood stories. And soon the hallway echoed with their laughter, muffled but unmistakable. It was during one of these conversations that Emily shared something more personal. "You know," she said softly, "I wasn't sure I'd ever smile like this again. Losing Mark. It took everything from me. Some days I just sat in silence, wishing someone could understand." Daniel's heart ached for her. "I get that," he said quietly. "I felt the same after my divorce. You feel invisible, like the world moved on, and you're stuck in a loop of memories." She was silent for a moment, then whispered, talking to you like this. It helps more than I thought it would." "It helps me too," he admitted. "It's like knowing someone's there, even if they're just a few inches away behind a wall, makes the loneliness a little lighter." That night, Emily didn't hum. She simply whispered, "Daniel, I feel safe talking to you." "I feel the same," he said, his voice almost trembling with the honesty of it. It was a turning point. Neither could see the other, yet the bond between them had deepened. They were two broken hearts finding fragments of solace in each other's presence. And the wall that once separated them had become a conduit for connection, for trust, for hope that the next few days brought a gentle closeness in their daily lives. Daniel would leave small notes in the hallway. Things like, "Hope your day is better today," or "Coffee's waiting if you want to join later." Emily would reply in kind, sometimes leaving tiny sketches or poems slipped under his door. The interactions were subtle but meaningful, building a rhythm of care and attention that neither had expected from living next to a stranger. One night, Daniel was brushing his teeth when he heard Emily's voice, this time soft but tinged with curiosity. "Daniel, do you think people can really connect like this? Without meeting face to face, without seeing each other?" He paused, considering. "I think so. Some connections are deeper than appearances. They're about understanding, empathy, just being present. You've been present for me, Emily. I don't know how to explain it, but it matters." There was silence for a moment. Then she whispered, almost shyly, "It matters to me, too." That simple acknowledgement made something inside both of them shift. The trust, the shared vulnerability. The quiet joy of knowing someone cared, it was building into something neither could ignore. Over the next week, their conversations through the wall became more frequent, more personal. Daniel started noticing little things, the way she described her favorite tea ritual, the stories about her late husband, the little frustrations of daily life. Emily noticed his habits too, the soft humming he did while cooking, the way he always left a cup of water near the sink, the little jokes he made even when tired. One night, as Daniel listened to her humming through the wall, he realized something important. It wasn't just about helping her heal or being there in her loneliness. He cared about her, deeply, and he suspected she felt the same. But neither of them had to say it. It was enough that they shared the quiet, the laughter, the whispers, enough to feel close without rushing or forcing anything. The wall had become more than a barrier. It was a bridge connecting to hearts that had once been broken. And both Daniel and Emily knew, without fully admitting it yet, that this connection might be the beginning of something far more profound than friendship. A slow, careful, and tender kind of love, born from trust, empathy, and the courage to be vulnerable. That night, Daniel sat by his bathroom sink, looking at the faint reflection in the mirror. He smiled softly, thinking of Emily humming on the other side of the wall. Life had a strange way of surprising him, but for the first time in months, he felt a quiet hope. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this. Whatever it was real, and it mattered. The storm hit Portland suddenly, turning the streets slick with rain and making the night feel colder than usual. Daniel was sitting by his window, a mug of tea warming his hands, listening to the wind howl and the trees sway outside. He had just finished a late project, but something in the air made him uneasy. It wasn't just the storm. It was the silence from Emily's apartment. Usually he could hear her soft music, her humming, or even the distant sound of her shower running. Tonight there was nothing at first. He told himself she was probably asleep or busy. But as the rain grew heavier and the wind rattled the windows, a creeping worry settled in his chest. He tried calling her, but there was no answer. Normally she would pick up or at least call back. His heart began to race. Something didn't feel right. Without thinking twice, he grabbed his coat and ran next door. The hallway was dark except for the small lights along the ceiling, reflecting off the wet floor. He knocked firmly on Emily's door, calling her name. "Emily, it's Daniel. Are you okay?" No response. His mind raced. The building was old, the doorknobs often left unlocked by mistake. He hesitated only a moment before trying the handle. To his relief and worry at the same time, it turned. The door was unlocked. He stepped inside, calling again softly, "Emily." The apartment was dimly lit by the occasional flash of lightning through the windows. Daniel's eyes adjusted quickly, scanning the living room and hallway. Nothing. Then he heard a faint sound, a quiet groan coming from the bathroom. He rushed forward. There she was, sitting on the cold tile floor, wrapped in a towel, her hair wet and plastered to her face. She had slipped in the shower when the power went out, and it was clear she had hurt her ankle. But more than that, there was fear and fatigue written across her face. The kind that comes when someone feels completely alone and overwhelmed. Daniel moved quickly but gently, kneeling beside her. "Emily, I've got you," he said softly. He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight carefully. "You're okay. Just a little slip." She leaned on him, trembling slightly. I didn't know who else to call," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the storm. "You called the right person," he said reassuringly. "You're not alone. I'm right here." He guided her to the living room sofa, covering her with a warm blanket. The storm outside roared, but inside, the space between them was quiet, safe. Emily rested her head on the back of the couch, shivering slightly from the cold and the shock. Daniel sat beside her, rubbing her shoulders gently. He didn't say much, words weren't needed. Just his presence was enough. After a few minutes, she looked up at him. Her blue eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "I was scared. I didn't want to be alone." Daniel smiled softly, feeling a lump in his throat. "You never have to be alone," he said simply. "Not while I'm here." They sat together in silence, the storm pounding outside, listening to the rain hitting the windows. For the first time, they allowed themselves to fully feel the weight of everything: grief, fear, loneliness, and yet there was comfort in knowing someone was there to share it. As the minutes passed, Emily's breathing began to steady. Daniel fetched a pair of slippers and helped her onto them, keeping his hand near hers in case she needed support. She looked at him, and this time the smile wasn't tentative or polite. It was genuine, a small flicker of light breaking through the darkness. "You really came for me," she said quietly, almost in disbelief. "I always would," he replied without hesitation. Over the next hour, they talked softly. Emily explained how the storm had caught her off guard, how the power outage had thrown everything into chaos. She spoke about the fear of being alone, of slipping back into old sadness without anyone to notice. Daniel listened carefully, nodding and offering comfort where words failed. "You've been different from anyone I've met recently," Emily admitted. "You don't rush to fix things. You just stay. And that's something I didn't realize I needed." Daniel reached out and gently held her hand. Sometimes that's all people need, just to know someone's there. The storm began to ease, the rain slowing to a soft patter against the windows. Daniel helped Emily into dry clothes and made her a cup of warm tea. They sat together on the sofa, sipping quietly, both aware of the closeness that had been growing between them. It wasn't romantic in a flashy or urgent way, but it was deep, real, and steady. The kind of connection that builds trust and care over time. Emily glanced at him, her voice soft. "Daniel, I've never felt this safe with anyone in a long time." "You should," he said gently. "You deserve to feel safe. And I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in months, Emily allowed herself to lean back fully, to relax, to let someone in. Daniel didn't rush or push. He simply sat beside her, holding her hand when needed, making her feel seen and supported. That night marked a shift in their relationship. The sound through the bathroom wall, once a strange, delicate way of connecting, had transformed into real presence. No walls, no distance, no muffled voices. They were face to face, heart to heart, understanding that sometimes human connection comes at unexpected moments, in the middle of storms and in ways that words alone cannot capture. Over the next days, their bond deepened naturally. Daniel checked on her after work, sometimes stopping by with coffee or a small snack. Emily, in turn, found herself looking forward to those visits. The comfort of having someone who understood her without judgment. They laughed together, shared stories, and even made plans for small outings, trips to the nearby park, walks along the rainy streets, or simple errands that became moments of joy together. One evening, Emily paused before leaving his apartment. "Daniel, I feel like I can breathe again," she said softly, looking directly into his eyes. "You should," he replied. "You've earned it." There was no need for grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Their connection had grown quietly, naturally, through care, trust, and the shared understanding of loneliness and healing. They had both been hurt before, but together they were discovering something gentle and steadfast, a companionship that felt safe, real, and hopeful. From that night onward, the wall between their apartments was no longer a symbol of separation. It had become a memory, a reminder of how they first connected, how small acts of empathy and presence could lead to profound human connection. Their lives intertwined in a simple, tender way that neither had expected, but both cherished. Daniel realized something important. Love doesn't always arrive in a blaze of fireworks. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in moments of vulnerability, in gestures of care, in the willingness to be present when someone else needs you most. And in Emily's eyes, he saw that same realization reflected. As the storm cleared and the city settled into a calm night, Daniel and Emily sat together on the sofa, sipping tea, talking softly, and enjoying the warmth of being truly seen. That night, both hearts felt lighter. Both knew that whatever challenges came next, they would face them together with patience, kindness, quiet strength. It wasn't dramatic or flashy, but it was real. It was lasting. It was love, beginning in its purest, most tender form.